This is the second half of Chapter 7 on polynomials. This is day 4. I'd like you to try this warm-up, which are the skills that we've been working on so far in this second half of Chapter 7. I'd like you to pause the video, try the problems, and then I'd like you to check back to the notes to see if you've got them correct. And then you'll know what you know and what you need to ask questions on. Today we are going to work on some more multiplying of polynomials. We're going to multiply a binomial times a binomial, and we're also going to look at some special product rules. We're not necessarily going to memorize them, but just know what to expect when we see them. So here's some review of what we did yesterday and what we did in the first pieces of multiplying is when we multiply a binomial times a binomial, we can use the distributive property twice. So we know that if we have just one number, so if this 2x wasn't there right now, we would multiply that negative 4 to the x, and we would multiply negative 4 times negative 5. So our answer would be negative 4x and then plus 20. But we don't have just negative 4, okay? We actually have 2x minus 4 or plus a negative 4. So we actually have another part that we need to multiply. And so what we also need to do is we need to multiply this 2x part right here to both the x and the negative 5. So when we multiply the 2x times the x, and then we're going to also have to multiply the 2x times negative 5. And so that's going to give us 2x squared, and then 2x times negative 5 is going to give us negative 10x. So that's our polynomial answer, except we always have to look for like terms. And these are like terms, so we can combine them together because they are both x to the first power. We cannot combine them with x to the second because that's a different term. So our final answer then would be 2x squared. We would add the negative 10 and the negative 4 to get negative 14x, and then plus 20. So that's one way of thinking about multiplying a binomial times a binomial. But we also looked at doing the same process but using an acronym called FOIL. First, outside, inner, last, to keep track of all the multiplications. So I'll review that as well. When we look at FOIL and we look at the F in FOIL, we're looking at the first term in each parenthesis. So x and x are the first term in each parenthesis. And so when we multiply the first terms in each parenthesis, our F would be x times x. And when we multiply those together, that would give us x squared. So now let's look at the outside terms. The outside terms are the outermost terms. So this term right here and this term right here are the most outside terms in your problem. So we would be multiplying the x times the negative 7, and that would give us negative 7x. Then let's look at the inner. These are the innermost terms. These are our I terms, inner terms. So we'd be multiplying 3 times x, which would give us 3x. And then last but not least, we have our last terms in each parenthesis. So here's our last term and our last term. And when we multiply our last terms, it would be the 3 times the 7, which would give us 21. So again, there's our polynomial, and if we don't have any positive or negative signs, that means those values are positive. So we're going to add these all together, and we could even put a plus here if you want. And we only can combine like terms again. So negative 7x and 3x can be combined and added together. So then our final answer would be x squared, because there are no other x squared terms to combine with, and then the negative 7x's added with the 3x's give us negative 4x, and then plus 21. So there's our answer using FOIL, okay? A third way that some students really prefer is to use a box method. And in the box method, what has to happen is you take each of these pieces of the binomial, or each term of the binomial, and write them above a box. And then you do the same thing for these two, and you write them next to a box as well. And then what happens is you have to do all the combinations of multiplication for each row and column. So what that means is you have to multiply this x times this x to get x squared. You multiply this x right here and the 6 to get 6x. This negative 5 has to be multiplied with the x to get negative 5x. And this negative 5 has to be multiplied with the 6 to get negative 30. And then again, all of those boxes are your answer, but again, we look for like terms to combine, and those can be combined. So our final answer would be x squared plus 1x minus 30. And of course, we don't need that 1 in there. But the nice thing about using the box method that a lot of students like is that you can actually use it for more complicated polynomials. So if you look at example 4 right here, we could actually use it to multiply 3x and 2. So here's our 3x and our 2 by x squared minus 2x plus 5. So again, see all these terms listed above. And so again, now we're going to multiply the x squared and the 3x, which would give us 3x to the third. We'd multiply the 3x times the negative 2x to get negative 6x squared. We'd multiply the 5 and the 3x to get 15x. So you kind of see how this works. And then again, we continue on by multiplying the x squared and the 2 to get 2x squared. And we multiply the negative 2x and the 2, which would give us negative 4x. And finally, the 5 and the 2 to give us 5 times 2, 10. And then C, do you have any like terms? Well, I can see that I have an x squared term here and an x squared term here, so those can be added together to give us negative 4x squared. I don't have any other x to the third, so that will just be by itself. But then notice I also have an x to the first and an x to the first, so when I add 15x plus negative 4x, that gives me 11x, and again the 10 wouldn't be combined with anything else. So there is our answer. So 3 different ways to multiply polynomials. And you really should just maybe try each one once and see which one seems to sink in and make the most sense. And then I would stick with one way or another. So here are a bunch of examples, similar to ones you've already tried, okay? So what I would like you to do for some practice is to try the ones that we don't do right now. Try number 1 and 3 on your own and then check the notes. And I'm gonna go ahead and go through number 2 right now. So in question number 2, I'm going to actually use the FOIL method because I think a lot of students tend to like that. So this is the first term and the first term for FOIL, and when we multiply those together, we get 2m times 2m, which is going to give us 4m squared. And you don't need to write the 2m times 2m, but I think it helps us keep our work straight and not make as many mistakes when we're trying to keep that all in our head. So here's the outside and the outside term. So these are our O's, and that is going to be 2m times 5, which would give us 10m. Now let's take care of our innermost terms right here. So our innermost terms are, well, multiplying negative 5 times 2m, which gives us negative 10m. And then last but not least, we have our last term here and our last term here, which gives us negative 5 times 5, whoops, I'll write this above, which then gives us negative 25. Again, we combine any like terms. Notice we have 10m and negative 10m, but what happens when we combine those? Well, they add up to 0. So those kind of go away, they cancel out, and so our final answer would be 4m squared minus 25. Again, you try the other 2 on your own and check the notes. But what I want to point out is that this is one of our special products. So I'm going to slide through a little bit. This is the special product. And if you look at these 2, what's different is one is a plus b and the other is a minus b. And what you can expect to happen when you have the exact same thing, but one's a plus and one's a minus, otherwise everything else is the same, you're going to expect what's going to end up happening is some of your terms are going to add up to 0. And again, I'm not expecting you to memorize that special product, but you need to know that it can happen. You might not always get 3 terms at the end. So here are a bunch more examples. So let's go ahead and try a little bit more complicated one. I'm going to have you try number 5 on your own, and then check back to the notes. I am going to do number 6 again with you using FOIL. So again, here's our first term, here's our first term. Okay, this gets a little more complicated because now we have 8m squared times m squared. And so that's going to give us 8m to the 4th. So we still need to remember our rules from the first half of chapter 7. Now let's take a look at our outside term. Okay, this is an outside term and this is an outside term. And when we multiply these together, we would get 8m squared times negative 3m, which is going to give us negative 24. Oh, that's an n at the end, I'm sorry. And that's going to give us negative 24m squared n. Okay, so again, these are just a little bit more complicated, so I wanted to go through at least one of these. Here's our inside terms right here. And so we're going to multiply negative n times m squared. Well, a positive times a negative is going to make a negative. And then we could write m squared, but we usually write the terms in alphabetical order. So I just switched the order because that's how we usually write in math. And then last but not least, we're going to go through the last term times the last term, which is going to give us negative n times negative 3n, which a negative times a negative is a positive, so we're going to get 3n squared. So look for like terms, okay? This term right here has m squared n, and this term right here has m squared n. And so these are like terms, and so we can combine those. We have negative 24 m squared n's and negative 1 m squared n's, so we would have a total of negative 25 m squared n's. 8m to the 4th cannot be combined with anything else, and neither can 3n squared. And remember, when there's no negative in front, that means there's a plus in between. And so this is your final answer right here. All right, I told you to try number 5 on your own and then check the answers, but we're going to go back and look at number 4. A very, very, very common mistake with number 4 is people will take and square that based on what they did in the first half of chapter 7. But that is not accurate and correct, because that was if we had 4x, the quantity squared. But this has a plus or minus in the middle, so we can't do it that way. And that's the difference. So what we need to do is we need to remember that we are taking this quantity right here, x minus 4, and multiplying it with itself twice. And now we can use FOIL or distributive property twice or the box method to continue solving this. And this is actually another one of our special products. So I'll go ahead and do this one. Here's our first term times our first term, which gives us x times x, or x squared. Now I'm going to do my outside terms. I know I'm not writing the things in there right now. I'm just verbally talking about them. Okay, that's going to give us x times negative 4, which is negative 4x. Then we're going to multiply these intermost terms, which is negative 4 times x, or negative 4x. And then we're going to do our last term right here times our last term, which gives us positive 16. And again, notice these can be combined, so our final answer would be x squared minus 8x plus 16. And again, this is one of those special products, and I don't expect you to memorize it, but notice when we have x minus 4, that same thing multiplied with itself twice, that is another one of our special products. And what ends up happening, and you don't need to memorize this, but what ends up happening is whatever this is in your final answer, it's that squared. okay? And whatever this is right here, it's plus that squared. But what this middle term comes into play is it's -2 times your A and your B, or times each of those numbers. So again, this is not something I expect you to memorize, but just it could be helpful later on, and you might use it a little bit more in future math classes. But those are our 3 special products, and the one that I skipped was really just the same thing we just talked about, except that instead of A minus B times A minus B, it's A plus B times A plus B. So those are the things I wanted to talk about today in this video. So that's the end of our day 4 video.